that's, yeah.
We're just waiting for quorum, ladies and gentlemen. We need two. Could you do a better job, please? And he does. We now have quorum. We can start. Thank you very much. I knew it. Members of the committee, I'll call the meeting to order. Please turn your electronic devices to silent or vibrate and ensure that you are properly signed into the system. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest from any members of the committee? Seeing none, we do have several changes to the order of the agenda, and this is mainly because of late submissions. So I'm going to read them off, and then if I could have a mover for the changes in order and the seconder, I'd appreciate that. 3.1 will be first. Then we'll move to 4.1, which will be second. And I'll ask that 5.1, reports 5.1 and 6.3 be moved ahead till just after that presentation, or delegation, sorry. And then we'll go over the page to 4.2. That will be our third item. and ask that report 5.5 be moved up to just after that. And then we will move to the front of the page. 3.2 will be our fourth item. Followed by reports 5.2 and 5.3. I assure you it's all done in good faith and it'll all work out well, whatever it is. And then we will go to our consent items. That would be 6.1 and 6.2, but I'll ask that 5.4 be moved to our last item before other business, because there is a confidential report associated with that, and if we have to move into closed session, we can do it at that point. So if I could have a motion from some member of the committee, Chair Caslin, and a seconder for that, please, Councillor Timms. All in favor? Thank you very much for your understanding and all that. Yes, and now we're going to have an introduction of a new staff member by Director Giles.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to introduce everybody to Jennifer Whither. Jennifer, if you would just stand up, please, and show yourself. Jennifer has just joined us as the new Manager of Environmental Planning with the region. She has just go through some of her background. She's got a Bachelor of Environmental Studies from the University of Waterloo with a minor in biology, and she's currently completing her Master's of Urban Planning at University of Waterloo. She's a certified project management professional. She's been working for over 14 years, mainly in the private sector. She's done a number of jobs throughout the GTA and a smattering of jobs in the Niagara region, so she is familiar with it. And she lives in Pelham, and she's just joined us about 2 weeks ago, I think it is. So we're currently working with her to build up the rest of her team to help us out with a number of projects that we're taking on. So please join me in welcoming Jennifer to Niagara region. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Moving on to the first order of business. It's 3.1, creating the Niagara UNESCO Global Geopark across the full Niagara region. We have two presenters, Ian Lucas, a member of the Geospatial Niagara Board, and Phil Davis, a member of the Cultural Resource, or he is the Cultural Resource Coordinator, the Niagara Region Native Center. Welcome, gentlemen. Is everything turned on? Yes, there we go.
That's correct. That's great.
Sego, honey, bujo, tanzi. What's up? My name is Phil Davis. I'm Mohawk Kanyahaga Hagi of the Six Nations, and I'm here with my friend Ian to talk to you about the project and with my peoples, the Haudenosaunee. We have what we say are words that come before all else. I'd like to share that with you to kind of set the tone for what we're presenting to you, because with this project, this potential project, is to think beyond, outside the box, especially what you consider to be a park. You know, we're talking about a land base. And because we're talking about a land base, I felt it appropriate to share these words with you. And these words are to keep ourselves humble, keep our feet on the ground, remind us of what's really important, and what's been provided for us as human beings as we walk through our life. So we give greetings and love and understanding to the peoples of the earth, to the streams, the pools, the lakes, the trees, the medicines, to the corns and the fruits, to the forest for their usefulness, to the animals that give themselves for clothing and provide us with sustenance for food, to the great winds and the lesser ones, to our elder brother, the sun, our grandmother, the moon, and to to the four messengers of Creator who reveal his wishes to us, and to the Creator who is the source and ruler of health and life. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I would remind you that you have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Ian Lucas. I'm the Board Secretary for Geospatial Niagara. The Executive Director of Geospatial Niagara is in the audience, but he works here for the region in the planning department, so it seemed like a bit of a conflict of interest for him to come up here. But I might spin round if you have any questions later to get some answers. What we'd like to do is introduce you to a concept that's been so far 3 years in the making, called the Niagara. That's the way in which it's pronounced, the Niagara UNESCO Aspiring Global Geopark. And what we want to do is to, I'd like you to sort of not close your eyes fully, but almost suspend your feelings about what a park is. A typical park, you go through a gate, and sometimes you pay money, and if you're lucky enough to go to Short Hills, you don't. But the park has a boundary, and it has certain constraints on use. What we're looking at here is a UNESCO concept of a park, which is called a global geopark, which essentially, I'll just go back, it relies on its geological heritage and geographical heritage. In this case, we're going back 12,000 years, to create an area of interest that will be attractive to people all around the world. It's grassroots organization. It's designed to create a high-value tourism destination, and it is self-funding, which is probably music to a lot of ears. What it's not is really important. This is where I want to go back to the whole concept. It's not a conventional park. It's not a legislative boundary. There are no land use restrictions. In the Niagara region, we're talking about the whole of the region, every municipality, right border to border to border to border. There are numerous world-class geosites, some of which you're familiar with, like Niagara Falls and go into Balls Falls, but we would also include, Wainfleet Bog and all kinds of others. We'll get to that. And these are sort of based on geomorphological themes. The geotourism, which is, I think, what a lot of people here will be interested in, is a tourism that centers around the geographical character of a place, and in particular its culture, aesthetics, heritage, and so on. What are the economic benefits of geotourism? There are now well over 100 geoparks around the world, and they share their information with each other, and they all help each other, which is kind of unusual. And all of them report increase in job opportunities, economic activity, diversification of tourist offerings, and particularly in rural regions, additional sources of income and opportunities for local specialty crafts and so on. The revenues come from branded business opportunities and from sponsorships, and we've got these the structure for these done already. We've recently had some research done by a volunteer who looked at the information around the world from geoparks, and in particular, they looked at the British and the Portuguese examples because they're fairly recent. And you can see that the important thing here is the leverage ratio of 7.7 to 1 in terms of investment to revenue resulting from the formation of these parks. So you've got enhanced tourism revenues. We're looking, I think, in Niagara we looked at some of the statistics on average night stay, and we'd like to be able to increase those at least 50%, if not double them, by incorporating the region as a global geopark. The key pillars that the geoparks rest on are conservation and restoration. So a restoration example might be the Welland canals, where there's the older canals, the 1 and 2, are in pretty poor shape in certain areas, and there's an opportunity for here to restore those and set them up as one of our what we call geosites, or geosite network in that case. Sustainability, growth, cultural awareness. Phil's going to be talking very briefly in a moment about that. And really importantly, education. We've spent the last 3 years going into schools and talking to Brock and Niagara College about this, gaining support, and that's a very important aspect of this. So we've got conservation, education, sustainability. Now I want you to picture yourselves living in, for those of you that live in Niagara, living inside a geopark, inside a global geopark. The opportunities for your kids, your grandkids, your friends, relatives from around the world to enjoy something different, something new that takes them to every part of Niagara. We've got, we're planning very unique cultural events, which of various kinds. This is Phil again, I think is going to be talking a little bit about this. And we wanted to look currently at where these geoparks are. The highest concentration, believe it or not, is in China and Southeast Asia. Second is Europe. And when you look at the Americas, we're showing 4. Actually, on the 17th, there was a new one in Quebec that was announced, the Per Se Park in Quebec. So there's now 5 in North America. 3 of those are in Canada.
I'm just going to interrupt to remind you have 2 more minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So why not Niagara? We're involving everybody in the community. There are various opportunities coming up as Canada's Summer Games, the total solar eclipse in 2024, and we have a lot to offer. These are just some of the examples. And we are quite a way through the accreditation process at the moment. And we have also talked to and received support from these organizations, as you can see on the list. Here's what the geopark's going to look like. You can't see very clearly on the slide. There's about 30 geosites on there. And I'm going to hand over to Phil to talk for a minute on.
So Niagara, next between the 2 bodies of water, is a word from the Mohawk Nation used for these lands and is the origin of the word Niagara. Cultural history in our region reaches back 12,000 years and is evident in the multitude of archaeological digs and findings, which are on display in many museums and is captured beautifully on display at the Miwinja Archaeological Gallery in Fort Erie. Indigenous ancestry who lived, traded, and created a flint knapping industry, which includes tools and weapons dating back 11,000 years, with some originating from across North America. Use of resources and lands by many nations, such as the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Hurons. Current roadways were designed from original trails used largely as trade routes. Contributions of the War of 1812, the Landscape of Nations memorials, Treaty Belt signings, the Bruce Trail, and of course Niagara Falls have direct links to our ancestors and enrich the geological and historical value here in Niagara. Currently, there are many Indigenous organizations within the region, with oldest being the Niagara Regional Native Center, which looks forward to participating and engaging further on this new path.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We have some comments and questions. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ian and Mr. Lucas and Mr. Davis for the presentation. The context is very intriguing to me. We've been interested in restoring the second well and canal structures for years.
Councillor, could I ask you to speak through the chair, please, and speak loud into the microphone so we can all hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, welcome and thanks for the presentation. You mentioned the possibility of restoration of the second well and canal as part of the one of the projects that might be leveraged by or accomplished by this designation. We've been trying to achieve National Historic Site status for that canal for years and years and keep running into more academic arguments about how they have those canals elsewhere in the country. So this is an opportunity to maybe pursue that in a different way. It looks to me like this is a way of marketing the peninsula as opposed to building or finding or developing, like we have worked a long time at the Conservation Authority to establish a master plan for Cave Springs on the escarpment. Councillor Hodgson co-chaired the committee to get that master plan put together, and we're still waiting for the Niagara Escarpment Commission, Councillor Beatty, to approve that master plan. And that was very detailed with many consultation, many protocols to meet the Escarpment Commission's definition of a park on the escarpment. So how does that kind of project fit in with the UNESCO Global Geopark concept?
If I could just go back to the first part of your comment question about the Welland canals. We've spent a lot of time looking at the possible restoration opportunities, and we think they're there, and we think this could potentially be a funding source for that also, directly related. As far as the definition of a geopark as separate from, let's say, the Cave Springs restoration site, if you like, the geopark is a coordination group amongst geosites, one of which would probably be Cave Springs, right? So we've already identified 29 possible sites, and we haven't even scratched the surface, to be honest. But we want to start somewhere with a reasonable set of sites, and then gradually add them every year. Every 4 years, you have to be reaccredited, right? So it's a constant process of adding geosites, promoting those, building the geotourism, getting the geotourism snowball really rolling. And I don't think it impinges on any of those other activities. Sorry, I didn't mean to press the button. It doesn't impinge on those activities, but it supports them as they come to fruition. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Through you, Madam Chairman, I think I'm getting a sense of this as an effort to market all of these sites and put them in front of the world as with the UNESCO brand on top of it. I think the escarpment's already branded as a UNESCO unique biosphere. Mm-hmm. And this is doing something different than that. This is saying UNESCO brands this as a place to visit.
If I can address that, the World Biosphere is a great designation, but it's a relatively small area compared to the rest of Niagara. So it's all the Southern Shore communities and so on are missing out on that. People aren't attracted to Waynfleet or to West Lincoln if they just hear about the biosphere. If they hear about all the other attractions that are in the Niagara region, including the biosphere, we think that's a major sort of magnet for growing geotourism.
Thank you. So, and then I guess my last question is to Mr. Lucas. The advantage of this beyond the biosphere is that the cultural history of the 12,000 years. We spent a lot of time at Cave Springs working with First Nations groups of several groups. I think Bill knows a little better. But so this is an opportunity to bring that kind of element into the marketing of the Niagara region. And could you speak to a little bit about what's unique about this approach in terms of incorporating the First Nations history here?
Well, it's something that isn't really common knowledge as to, especially here in Niagara, is to probably a few things that I write off there. One of them being going back that the artifacts come from all over North America.
Can you just make sure you speak into the microphone, please?
Yeah, so a few of them on here that were mentioned, and the one being that the artifacts from across North America. Those came out of the archaeological findings of the Peace Bridge. And there's so many things that are not common knowledge to us nowadays. Our history was never orally recorded, but it is becoming to fruition through science and technology as to how long we've actually been here. So tying that into with tourism for us as an organization and to be a potential site as well will help us educate, re-educate as we move forward. It'll give us opportunity to create an economy that'll help sustain us too, and for our children and our grandchildren to move forward with, and to be proud of where we come from. You know, I'm 54 years old. I've moved away from Niagara a couple of times, and I always keep coming back. It feels like home for whatever reason, and I attributed that a lot to my ancestors being here on this land. You know, I've hiked every single place around here, and it all feels so familiar. So I think there's something innate in that in itself, and to share that with the world would be just an exceptional opportunity.
Right.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas.
Members of the committee, just to remind you, there is no report associated with this, and I'm sure that our staff will have many comments when we refer it to them. Chair Kasdan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the presenters, thank you for your presentation today. Just a couple of questions for my own benefit, if you could, please. I'm always in favor, Madam Chair, of highlighting what we have here in Niagara for the benefit of tourism and education and understanding our history. And I know that we have a long history here in Niagara that we can use we can exploit for that benefit. What defines a particular aspect? And I think, Madam Chair, the presenter said 29 identified sites in Niagara so far. What's the criteria for a site?
It's a site of geological and geographical interest that has had an effect on either commerce, people settling. For example, the Welland Canal is a classic geosite network, right? All the Welland Canals, you know, the various ones, and the fact that the stone came from Niagara for building the first two, and so on, and some of the quarries would become geosites because it's all interconnected. So does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you, and that's what I was looking for. I wasn't sure if it was a natural feature or could it be something that was man-made?
It's both.
It's both.
Yes.
And is it the significance that makes it an identified site, or what is the criteria to make it a site?
It probably take too long to explain what we did, but briefly, in 2015 we gave some postgraduate students from Niagara College a thesis project to go and identify, as well as they could, the top 30, let's say, sites that would attract tourists for a combination of the reasons that we just talked about. There is a set of qualifications for actually, you know, deciding what is a good site and what is not. One of the things that they came up with was an apology to say there are so many sites that we would have liked to have taken more time investigating, but these are the top 29.
Mm-hmm. So do they have to fit into a specific criteria that they're visitable or they encourage participation? You know, for example, wineries in Niagara, and
Yeah.
there are over 100, but they're spread over the entire Niagara region. Do they qualify as a site, or is that not part of the criteria?
I think certain areas within the grape growing region would qualify for example, the benches, because they have an identifiable geological history that's different from Niagara on the Lake, for example, right? So the whole of Niagara on the Lake might have a designation from a vineyard point of view, and then maybe Beamsville Bench would have a different one because it has a different set of characteristics.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is there a cost to the program?
Well, there is a cost, but we're not asking for money. The costs, we estimate the total cost to get this through the accreditation process. We're going in June to Ottawa to meet with the Canadian accreditors for that. They're based in Alberta, and then up to the UNESCO people in Europe. It's going to cost somewhere between $60,000 and $90,000 to get that done. But we're looking at multiple initial sources of sponsorship and membership revenues to get that achieved.
Well, it's excellent, and I appreciate your presentation today. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I just want to, again, emphasize that anything that promotes Niagara and visitors to Niagara and things to do, highlighting our natural features and our man-made features is definitely a positive, so thank you.
Thank you, Chair Caslin. Councillor Beatty.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Very much appreciated the presentation. The first reaction I have is, where can I find out more? And I may have missed it in terms of that. If you have a website or you have means of exploring more, because the first appetizer taste caused me to come to the table. I'm a member of the Escarpment Commission, and I would ask that you consider a presentation. I think there will be perhaps at the beginning some confusion between the existing UNESCO designation and what you're talking about. It's I see them as being complementary, but I think if I hadn't heard this presentation, I might be uncertain about that. So I encourage a presentation to a future meeting of the Escarpment Commission. And there is a group referred to as the Niagara Escarpment Parks and Open Space, NEPAS is the term. And I think likewise, that group needs to have some idea of what you're planning and how it fits in, dovetails, or doesn't perhaps dovetail with their organization. Again, very encouraged by it. And a third outreach for you, I would very strongly recommend that you consider a presentation with the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. I think there would be significant interest because some of their sites obviously would be a focus and of interest to you. In particular, I'm very taken by the First Nations approach. Sir, I would love to have your words of wisdom presented somehow in print for future reflection. Was a very enlightening introduction to this topic. I've always been amazed about the concept of Turtle Island and would love to understand how First Nations, long before there were aircraft or spacecraft, could come to some idea that North America could have a connection to recognize the shape of a turtle. So with that aside, again, congratulations on the presentation and look forward to more information on the topic.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Thank you for the presentation. And first of all, your slide with all the locations on it, I really like how you have taken out also the man-made features and left of the natural features. I think that's a very unique way of presenting this, and I like it. I also like the fact that there's a bright star right over my house. So I'm assuming that's pretty close to Beamer Falls and the geological feature that's there. Also as a Conservation Authority member and a conservation site, looking for opportunities to partner. Am I right, through you, Madam Chair, to think of this more in terms as a designation that is more of a destination marketing sort of tool to get people to come to Niagara as a whole? Is that how I would envision this as sort of from an economic driver point of view?
Yes, Madam Chair, may I just respond to Councillor Beatty's
Oh, yes, of course, sorry.
Just first, sorry, Councillor.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Councillor Beatty, we have in fact approached the NPCA. And we've received an acceptance of an invitation of ours for one of their senior people to be on the board of the newly incorporated company as we go forward.
Perfect.
Going back to that star is in fact over your house, and you're absolutely right in assuming that this is a destination marketing opportunity with lots of bells, whistles, and benefits for the local community. People talk about when you talk to other geoparks. For example, we've been helped a lot by the Stonehammer Geopark in New Brunswick, and it helped a great deal. When you talk to the other geopark executive directors, they talk about geoparks being on people's bucket lists, and we're not talking about bucket lists in, Quebec or Manitoba. We're talking Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia and so on. They are becoming world-renowned as well-accredited, high-quality destinations. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes, and thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Because of that, have you approached the RTO, the Regional Tourism Marketing Board, or whatever we're calling the RTO these days? Have they come to the table? Are they prepared to help out in some capacity?
We have spoken. Sorry, Madam Chair. We have spoken with them. We wanted to try and get your support with a view to going up to the full regional council for support. Hopefully, if we could get some kind of motion of support at some point that we could take to the accreditation group, that would be very useful. But we have talked to the tourism marketing people, And we're going to be following this with, we're offering, as you can see, a series of presentations to anyone that wishes to get into more detail.
Absolutely, and I would like to reverse the invitation, have you make a presentation to the Conservation Authority as well. I think that would probably, ideally timing with the work that's going on with the Conservation, our strategic plan, and all the properties that we have that are not necessarily active or where people are aware of, and maybe there's an opportunity for more partnership in those areas as well. Last question through you, Madam Chair, is the with respect to the timing of this accreditation, to where are you looking at in terms of the time frame of it? Like, do we have time to refer this back to staff for some commentary and recommendation? Because I know we could get it in front of our economic development director, which is I think vacant at the moment, but we have an acting director, I hope, somewhere, to talk about how maybe we can be more helpful than just support, and then sort of a correlative offshoot of that. I'm not going to be able to say the word, so I'm not going to try. An offshoot of that might be if there's an opportunity to do a presentation one more cycle. Our cycles are 3 weeks. Is that going to throw off your time frame for bringing a larger, more fulsome discussion?
Well, our time frame, our target at the moment is a third quarter 2019 submission to the Canadian UNESCO Global Geopark Accreditation Group out in Alberta. So anything we do at this stage, I think if we could do it in parallel as opposed to waiting, that would be the ideal for us, because we need to, I don't know whether you all read the Standard. Anybody read the Standard? Yesterday there was an article about this, the global geoparks, and it was on the radio this morning. It's going to be on the radio on Sunday. So we've developed some momentum deliberately, sort of out of the gate here, and we want to keep that going. But if we can work in parallel with staff, that would be fantastic.
Well, it just sounds like you're looking at third quarter 2019. That a 3-week delay from our point of view to get some proper information, some alternatives, as opposed to just a motion of support. There might be more that we can do in terms of trying to support the application. That's just a suggestion, but I'll let whatever the decision of the committee is, I'm happy to support this. I think this is a great initiative. I look at it not just from where you're coming from, Madam Chair, but also the economic development, because a lot of, when the region sort of got out of tourism, it was let everything be about Niagara Falls and Niagara Lake, and as someone who's from Grimsby, I know that Grimsby has a lot to offer, and there's other places within the Niagara region that people, when they see Niagara Falls, you can watch the water for a few minutes and then you got to find something else to do. So we'd like them to see some of the other great features that we have throughout the entire region. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Caslin, for the second time.
Well, thank you, Matt. I did hear you on the radio this morning. I don't read the Standard, but I did hear you on the radio this morning. At the right time, Madam Chair, can I put a motion of support forward that's worded properly in support of what's happening?
Could I suggest perhaps that this be referred back to staff for comment, and they can come forward with a report that will be comprehensive by some member of the committee that has not spoken to it?
I did hear that timing was important, but I am willing to concede if that is the will of
3
committee.
weeks. Is there a member of the committee that would refer this? Councillor Marshall, and the seconder, Councillor Dart. All in favor? Thank you, and thank you very much for the presentation, gentlemen. There's a lot of interest around the table, as you can see, and for a good cause.
Thank you, Madam Chair, councillors.
Thank you very much.
I hope you won't be offended if we don't stay for the rest of the meeting.
No, absolutely. I don't know how you could miss it, but I can understand.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you and thank you for the prayer. It was beautiful. Could I remind people who are presenting to speak directly into that microphone? This meeting is being live streamed, so it's important that we catch all of your words. So I will now call on Mr. John Arians from the IBI Group, who will do a presentation about PDS 15, the Official Plan Amendment 6, OPA 6, Grimsby GO Transit Station Secondary Plan, the town of Grimsby. And before we hear Mr. Arians, could I have a mover and a seconder to bring reports 5.1 and 6.3 forward? Councillor Hodgson, and the seconder, Councillor Campion. Thank you very much for that. Please, Mr. Arians.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of committee, and thank you for the opportunity to address you. I'm here on behalf of Homes by DeSantis, who is a prominent Hamilton-based but a Niagara-based builder as well. I think in the 30-odd years they've been in business, they've built over 2,000 homes throughout Niagara, primarily in Grimsby and in Lincoln, but also within the city of Niagara Falls. I would like to discuss a concern that we have with the proposed GO Transit secondary plan, but please don't construe my comments in any way, shape, or form as suggesting we are opposed to the GO station or to GO Transit or to the wonderful economic benefits that this facility is going to bring to Niagara. We fully support it. There are some land use concerns we want to bring to your attention, and that's the only reason for my delegation. I do have a PowerPoint presentation. It's very brief. There are only 2 slides. The first one is a copy of the actual secondary plan. And just to put it in perspective, members of committee, and if I can just refer to that screen to my right, this is the area where Mr. DeSantis has an existing development project, which consists of an apartment building, some townhouses, more apartments, and a commercial building. As you can see, we're to the north of the Queen Elizabeth Highway. We're in the Winston neighborhood, and we are to the north of the GO Station secondary plan area. And our concern is the new changes that are being proposed to the secondary plan area will have an obvious detrimental impact on Mr. DeSantis's project. In particular, I'm talking about a 5-story, 60,000 square foot apartment or office building that is proposed on the lands that he owns. As you can see on the secondary plan, there are a number of designations and a number of colors that represent those different designations. And our concern is with the amount of new office floor space that is being introduced in this secondary plan area. Now, there are some existing employment designations, and we have no concerns over those because they're there as of right. Our concern is with respect to the new office potential. When we attended the public information centers and the open house, we asked the town and the consulting team if there were any marketing studies that were made that would identify, what is the current supply of office space, what's the absorption rate, what is the demand for new office space. And while we were told that there was some marketing information available, there was never any detailed marketing that was provided. So we looked at the new designations in this secondary plan area, and for new office space potential, we actually based it on Grimsby zoning standards. The potential is here for anywhere between 60,000 to 70,000 square meters of additional office space. Now that is huge. In English, that's about 700,000 square feet of new offices that have the potential of locating here. And obviously those offices are within walking distance of a GO facility, much closer than Mr. DeSantis, who's on the north side of the Queen Elizabeth Highway. So the concern we have is that all this new industrial office type development will have an impact on Mr. DeSantis' ability to build and market his project. And this is a slide showing the corner of the Casablanca interchange that Mr. DeSantis is developing. And I'll start over in this area. This project is known as Aqua Blue. It consists of a 6-story, 120-unit apartment building and 4 townhouses. Immediately to the right of that, this horseshoe-shaped building is 342 apartment units with 164 on the right side and 178 on the left. And then this building over here, this is what's known as the Casablanca Corporate Center. This is that 60,000 square foot office building that is zoned, it's site plan approved, and it's serviced. Now, for the past 2 years, Colliers International, a well-respected real estate firm, has been actively marketing this site. Our friends at the Regional Economic Development Department have been working with them and with Mr. DeSantis in an effort to find tenants, but unfortunately no tenants have come forward. And without tenants, your financing doesn't kick in. Without financing, with all due respect, no one's going to build a 60,000 square foot office building on spec. It's just not in the cards. So think of this office building being zoned and ready to go approximately 800 meters from a GO station, and now all of a sudden 60 to 70,000 square meters of additional office space being provided very proximate to the GO station, and that's our concern. If I can add another wrinkle to that, originally the concept was that the corporate center over here would only be a 3-story building, and that right beside it, over on this side, would be a 2-story office building. Now, as you can appreciate, if you know this area, we've got the ramp of the Queen Elizabeth Highway, and any office building proposed over here would be kind of hidden by this interchange. You wouldn't see it at all if you're coming from Niagara going towards Hamilton. So we were quite innovative. What we did is we took the 2-story building from here and we put it on top of the 3-story building, which would now create this Class A landmark office building as a gateway into Niagara. And in fact, Mr. DeSantis would like to establish his head office within this building as well. But when we proceeded to initiate that request, the town agreed, but they said, well, what you're in effect doing is you're converting this area from employment to residential. And we have a concern that you may not build the employment, so we were going to put a holding zone on this property until this corporate center is built. Through subsequent negotiations, we were able to only apply the holding zone to this part, which is the 10-story building containing the 178 units. So this building is currently under construction, but we cannot complete this site with this building until this building is built. So, you know, the whole viability of this mixed-use community is being threatened by this additional office space at the GO facility. And all we've suggested is that the town can implement a phasing strategy. The GO station is at least 4 or 5 years away. It's not imminent. Can we not phase it so that the new office development proposed near the GO station is held back until existing uses like this are fully developed and completed? So our ask before you quite simply is, please do not approve the secondary plan in its current form. Perhaps refer it back to staff in the town of Grimsby for further discussions and further negotiations, with our goal being to seek some type of a phasing strategy that would allow Mr. DeSantis to complete this project, because there are also those 178 units in the Aqua Azul project which are fully sold. We've got 178 residents who are ready to move into Niagara, but are also being held back because of the inability to market and lease the corporate center. So that's my submission to you, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Before I take questions, we do have a presentation by by Diana Moriali and Patrick Kennedy, which may explain some of this. So we'll take questions after their presentations.
So I can come back up
And
then?
you, certainly.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
Thank you. Could they come forward, please, then, for the presentation?
So good evening, members of Planning Committee. Today I will be co-presenting with our consulting lead, Patty Kennedy from Dillon Consulting. The Grimsby GO Transit Secondary Plan has been a team effort with support from town staff, Michael Seaman, Walter Basic, Amy Shanks, and Derek Brandt, and regional staff, Reno Mustachi, Matt Robinson, Alex Morrison, and Ron Tripp, as well as other public works staff. So I would like also to start off by thanking all those residents, stakeholders, businesses, and local and regional council members who have been participating in this over 2-year process, 2-year planning process for the Grimsby GO Station Secondary Plan. The presentation before you here today will outline the work that has been done to date and outline the secondary plan for this area that regional staff are recommending for approval at Planning Committee. We hope that with this information, you will recommend that the secondary plan be approved today. So we've been here a few times, and one of the things that we like to do is present, why are we doing a secondary plan in this area? And just to bring everyone back, municipalities across the greater Golden Horseshoe are leveraging transit investment to drive growth in appropriate areas. So with this provincial investment, it prevents a unique opportunity to proactively plan land uses and transportation networks and infrastructure around the GO station. Also, the province's growth plan directs municipalities to plan for intensification around GO stations. So transit stations and surrounding land uses serve as an important function within the regional transportation system, and a secondary plan is the best mechanism to proactively plan for change and enables the town and the region to set its priorities for these changes. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide, and the purpose of this slide is to outline the planning legislation we operate within the province of Ontario. The town and region are required to be in compliance with provincial plans when developing land use policy. Policy 1.0 of the provincial policy statement recognizes the long-term prosperity, environmental health, and social well-being depend on wisely managing change and promoting efficient land use and development patterns. Further policies state that settlement areas are intended to be the focus of growth and that their vitality and regeneration are promoted. Additionally, there's policies that go further and state that land use patterns within settlement areas must be based on densities with a mix of land uses which efficiently use land and resources and are appropriate for the infrastructure and public service facilities which are planned or available. It also minimizes negative impacts to air quality and climate change and promotes energy efficiency with support of active transportation, which are transit supportive and freight supportive. Therefore, cities and towns must provide a range of uses and opportunities for intensification and redevelopment, and planning authorities are directed to identify these appropriate locations. So the PPS requires that transportation and land use considerations shall be integrated at the stages of the planning process. So the Grimsby GO Transit Station secondary plan has been developed and completed concurrently with transportation analysis to inform the planning process, and that transportation has been considered throughout the decision-making of the land use plan. We believe that the Grimsby GO Station secondary plan before you today conforms to the provincial policy statement. As well, the 2017 growth plan provides direction to municipalities on managing growth and emphasizes that the importance of intensification and its ability to provide a diverse, compatible mix of land uses, including residential and employment areas, to support vibrant neighborhoods, active transportation goals, and enhanced transportation opportunities. Additionally, Section 2.2.5 of the growth plan states retail and office uses shall be directed to locations that support active transportation and have existing or planned transit, which this location does. So the Places to Grow Act also requires that all decisions under the Planning Act conform to the growth plan. So the components of the secondary plan support the growth plan policies through efficient use of land, efficient use of infrastructure, and the provision of high quality public spaces that support and create attractive and vibrant communities. In particular, one of the guiding principles in the growth plan is to prioritize intensification and higher densities to make efficient use of land and infrastructure and support transit viability, but not just residential. It also means intensification of employment. To achieve this key planning principle, transit-oriented development is the concept that underpins this plan. Transit-oriented development is the creation of a compact, walkable, pedestrian-oriented, mixed-use communities centered around high-quality transit systems. And we'll talk about that later in the secondary plan. Also, another plan that impacts this study area is the Greenbelt Plan, and its mandate is to protect agricultural land base and ecological environmental features. There's a policy in the Greenbelt Plan that allows for infrastructure to be built within the Greenbelt. So the secondary plan before you today is in conformity with the growth plan as well as the Greenbelt Plan. I won't spend too much time on this slide, but you've seen it before. These are the 6 phases that we've gone through for the secondary planning process. We are in the last phase, and today what's important about this slide is that we are looking to get approval of the secondary plan that has been adopted by Grimsby Town Council. And I think one of the highlights of my involvement in the plan, and I would also say Patty as well as the towns, is the amount of engagement that we have done on the secondary plan. The study process involved extensive consultation between internal town and regional departments, external agencies, and the public at numerous points throughout the project. The slide before you illustrates the amount of public engagement that has occurred to date on the secondary plan. To date, we have had 5 different public engagement events, as well as engagement opportunities, including an online survey, one-to-one meetings with the landowners. The process has allowed for various opportunities for individuals to comment on the plan and the vision. We have adjusted the plan throughout our consultation process to take in some of these comments that we have heard. Again, the process has allowed various opportunities to comment and be involved. And also, if you were unable to attend a public event, we made ourselves available. Just to quickly highlight the sessions, the first event was a visioning session, and it was done in a charrette format. We had a breakout session to help identify the heights and how these areas near the transit station could be redeveloped. We did have a somewhat not decent turnout at our first event. We had, I think, approximately 14 people, and for a secondary plan of this magnitude, that's not a good attendance. So we made sure that for the next public information center that we went above and beyond to make sure we got the word out in the community that we were doing the secondary plan, and through social media blasts and postcards that we mailed to individual homeowners, we were able to increase the attendance to 78 for the next public information center. And again, we reiterated what we did during our visioning session to make sure that the objectives of the plans were informed still made sense to these additional people that attended that first PIC, to confirm all of our objectives in the direction that we were going in. So again, we realized, there was a lot of engagement. People wanted to be involved, so we continued with that postcard format for our second public open house. And we had 148 people attend. Great debate. Overall, people were very supportive. There were some nuances or changes people wanted the plan, and we did work throughout that process. We then held our statutory public meeting on December 12th. There were 34 people in attendance. There were delegations made. At that time, we took back the feedback, adjusted the secondary plan, and went back to Town Council February 13th at Planning Committee to get the plan adopted. And now it is before Regional Council here today. So I'll turn it over to Patty to talk about the secondary plan.
Ms. Morella, can I just go back for a moment? So on February 13th, the secondary plan was approved by Grimsby Council?
It was adopted by their planning committee and then ratified the following week at Town Council.
Right, so it has been approved in Grimsby?
Adopted, yes.
Yeah, adopted. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Diana. So I just have a few slides to give you some additional more content and context. This secondary plan area this map here shows the broader urban structure and city structure for the town of Grimsby. You see the urban area in yellow occupying the lands to the north there, and the majority of Grimsby, as you know, is covered by green belt, so the future town of the growth hinges on planning for intensification in a successful way and finding opportunities to accommodate it. This secondary plan area is immediately to the south of one of the city's 2 major intensification areas, the downtown being one, the Winston neighborhood being the other. So looking ahead to the future and in the fullness of time, the expectation is that the Grimsby GO Station secondary plan area would work seamlessly in integrated fashion with that Winston neighborhood secondary plan. And in earlier parts of the project, we actually carried these as one cohesive plan, and for sort of more administrative reasons, we had to separate them out.
I'm sorry to interrupt again, and we're approaching the 10-minute mark, but this is a very important project by our municipal partner, so I'm going to give you some leniency, but try to wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few highlights about the secondary plan. The majority, basically in a nutshell, the idea is to concentrate that mixed-use development in and around the transit station area that you see in the central portion of the map. It's flanked by existing employment uses that are sort of on the south side of the QEW and the stable residential neighborhoods to the south of the train corridor. This slide simply, I'm not going to go through it line by line, but it does sort of highlight some of the big themes that we heard throughout that extensive engagement process. We did try to work collaboratively with everyone to find solutions to a number of the issues that popped up, and we believe we have found an ability to find compromise in most instances. I'm going to let Diana walk you through 2 very specific mods, and that'll wrap up the presentation.
So we've been working with the town on the secondary plan process from the beginning. So it was adopted by Town Council. We do our final review to see if there's any tweaks of policies to make it stronger. And we did have 18 modifications. They were all technical in nature. There were 2 additional modifications that were requested by the province. And it was to strengthen the language around the transit station. So the policies are before you. Policy 12.310. Half of the transit station that was approved by the GO Transit Environmental Study Report is within the Greenbelt. There is a policy within the Greenbelt plan that allows for infrastructure to be developed within the Greenbelt area. But we technically cannot change the designation of the town official plan. So we can't change specialty crop to a different designation, because that would mean we were not in compliance with the provincial plan. However, because there's that policy within the Greenbelt plan that says you're allowed to put infrastructure in, we were told to do it through a policy amendment. And that's why we've strengthened that language and have just done an overlay. Because we want to be transparent to the public and for them to know that there will be eventually transit facilities on the south side of the tracks. They may not be their opening day, but so that they know in the fullness of time, eventually that would occur. So that's why we have that overlay there, so everyone is aware of that. And again, one of the things that we've also been talking here at the region is that when the GO Transit Station is up and running, there's an opportunity too for perhaps a regional transit facility within West Niagara, whether it happens adjacent to the Grimsby GO Station area. There is eventually going to be a need for a West Niagara Transit Terminal, but we haven't done that work. We haven't done the feasibility study as to where it's going to be. But should it happen that the feasibility study, it shows that this is the right location adjacent to the Grimsby GO Station secondary plan, we wanted to allow for that permission to be there in the future. So that's why we've strengthened that policy. And so just to conclude the presentation, again, and I know that there might be some questions regarding to the secondary plan policies, and we're happy to answer that today. But today we're hoping to get approval at Planning Committee on the secondary plan and its policies. And if that were to occur, it would then go on to Council for ratification. And once we get that regional council approval, we would have to, under the Planning Act, circulate a notice of approval and notify all those that wanted to be involved. That we are approving the secondary plan. Under the new Planning Act, there have been some recent changes to the OMB. It's no longer the OMB, it's the Local Planning, I forgot what the A stands for. Appeals Tribunal. The secondary plan before you today is able to be appealed, but there's tests related. You can't just arbitrarily appeal something because you don't like a policy. There are 2 tests that have to be demonstrated and essentially is that the secondary plan before you today does not comply with the provincial policy statement, does not comply with the growth plan and Greenbelt plan. And this has been reviewed by the province. They have requested some changes and those changes have been made. So we fully believe that we are complying with provincial legislation.
Thank you very much for the presentation. So we'll have questions both to the delegation and the presentation. Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, first of all, my utmost appreciation for all the work that Diana and the staff and the team and all the town staff who are here, Derek, Michael, any other town staff, that have put in towards this process. It has been well received. Initially, some hesitation, some concerns, but I really appreciate the work that you have done through Dillon Consulting and through the staff to address a lot of those concerns and make them at least allay some of the fears that go with it, because I think the majority of people in Grimsby recognize that having a GO station in Grimsby is going to be a game changer for not just Niagara, but Grimsby specifically, and we'll be first out of the gate with it. So thank you. My first question is with respect to those minor modifications, can we just get confirmation, because the town has approved it in one way, we've made those 2 minor changes, that there's been no concerns for any of the minor modifications to the 2 major ones from the town of Grimsby. Everyone is comfortable with those and the reasons behind them?
Through you, Chair. Yeah, prior to us finalizing the plan, we did run the modifications to town staff just to tell them that they were technical in nature and they did not have any concerns. Okay,
thank you. And also, obviously, one of the big issues that came before leading up to the last election, and now is the whole concern about the environmental sensitivity of the woodlot. Could I ask you, through Madam Chair, for Diane, just to address how we've taken steps to ensure that the woodlot is protected?
Through the chair, there were, at our first public information center, and I think we kind of highlighted it at a very high level, there was a lot of concern regarding a woodlot that's adjacent to the GO Transit station. And some of the concern that we heard from some of the residents was that we protect this woodlot. And in particular, you might have heard of the Livingston extension that was, proposed to go through the woodlot. So we have put provisions in place in the secondary plan that will go on to help conserve that woodlot. In particular, we've asked that a forestry management plan be undertaken to understand if there's certain things that we need to do to help preserve this woodlot.
Thank you very much. One of the justifications, if I can, when we went through the Grimsby official plan review for the high intensification areas that were highlighted on the slide initially, was that was a trade-off between having a level of intensification at a certain level through some of the older neighborhoods in Grimsby, some of the established neighborhoods, and the goal was to identify downtown Grimsby and that Winston Road area for high intensification so that we would meet the guidelines on an average basis across Grimsby, and we wouldn't have what's sort of happening in St. Catharines, having that pressure where some of these older neighborhoods are seeing lots torn down and intensified out of character. So the logic and hopefully the sound reasoning behind that was that intensification. With this expansion of that intensification area sort of south of the road now, what does that do to Grimsby's sort of overall intensification average? Does this allow us to give us better protection for some of those older neighborhoods because we can point to this as a more intensification in an area that is already going to be requiring that?
Yeah. Through you, Chair. So I'll start it off, and I'm sure Patty will supplement my answer. So as Patty mentioned before, the town of Grimsby has identified intensification corridors. So here's one of them, which is north of the QEW, so that's the Winston neighborhood. The other one is downtown Grimsby, and in this area, in our secondary plan, it's right along here where this is our intensification corridor. One of the fundamental objectives of this plan is to make sure we have intensification in the right areas, and also one of the key objectives of the secondary plan, and we didn't go through it, is protecting of existing stable residential neighborhoods. So right here is an existing stable residential neighborhood. So it's within the secondary plan policy area. We haven't changed any land uses, we haven't changed any heights, but it's within walking distance of the GO Transit station area, and we wanted to plan the right transportation facilities to get these people who probably currently now drive to Burlington GO station. How can they walk or bike to the transit station? So that's why it's in our secondary plan, and also for us to build the right transitional provisions and heights. So you see this area in pink. It has lower heights, so that it's being respectful of that stable residential neighborhood to the south.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much for that, and I appreciate the work that you've done to address a lot of those concerns. So I can't say thank you enough, and how excited I am to see this plan come to fruition. Also because it means we can get that Casablanca EA started. So that's been on our to-do list for some time. The last question I have, and it's more to ask for your comment on the previous delegation about the appropriateness or the methodology for phasing. Is that an option for us on a secondary plan of this nature?
Yeah, so through you, Chair, I'll start off, and again, Patty will supplement my answer. I believe, so the area of concern predominantly that Mr. Arians and Mr. DeSantis have raised is this area in a darker pink. We allow for additional office use permissions in a mixed use setting. So you would have, your first floor would allow for office or commercial uses, and then residential on the top. What was missing in that presentation was that that area that I've just highlighted is built today. So essentially, we kind of do have a phasing policy in place. Right now, if you ever drive along the QEW corridor, you would see the Gateway Center on the west side, and on the east side, you would say Superstore and Rona. So we have met with those landowners. They like these additional permissions, and over the long term, feel that they will redevelop, but it's over the long term. We believe that this redevelopment will only occur perhaps in the mid to long term. So we're talking 10 to 20 years out before you're going to kind of see maybe some mixed use developments. What right now you're seeing Superstore recognizing that they just have a parking lot, so they're slowly coming in with some additional development applications within that parking lot. So maybe to introduce a restaurant use or some other type of commercial use, but that's like your step between that mixed use. So I personally, in my professional opinion, don't believe we need a phasing policy because it's going to take a long time for these lands to redevelop.
Thank you, and I'll just add to that comment. This plan is not a 5-year plan. This is a 20, 30-year plan for how we're going to develop, so I appreciate that. The last thing I will just say through you, Madam Chair, is whenever there has been a concern emailed or called to me, I've been able to get Diana to respond to it almost immediately, and she's addressed every one of those concerns that have been brought sort of over and above. I think of all those people that tried to contact online, I was probably responsible for about half of them being sent to you. So I apologize for that, but I do want to say thank you for all the work you did to address those concerns. And no one got back to me and said we weren't happy with the answer that we received. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you for the accolades too, Councillor. Councillor Timms?
Madam Chair, through you to the presenters, I'd like to review what you had said about the block of property there that's currently occupied by the GO bus parking station and the Casablanca, the Gateway Tourism Center. My recollection, it's all parking lot for those two purposes. So what this does is allow sometime in the future, much more dense, but at the moment, it's not, as Councillor Quirk was suggesting, nothing's going to happen too quickly.
Yeah. Through you, Chair, currently, and I wish I had the red dot, not this, but where the arrow is, so where the arrow is right now is if you drive on the South Service Road, you're going to see the signs for the GO Transit Station.
Right.
So that's all brush right now. You'll see the Starbucks over here where the arrow is, and on the other side, you're going to see the MTO car lot as well as the GO bus. There's additional permissions for that eventually over time, and we're probably talking 10, 20 years out for that to turn from a parking lot to some sort of mixed-use commercial, and we still have some sort of parking component too. One thing that is important for regional council to be aware of why this is so important, why the philosophy of Metrolinx has changed, is Metrolinx is actually one of the biggest parking landowners in Ontario, if not Canada. And they're trying to get away from that because it's costly to own parking stations. And so what they're doing right now with the City of Burlington, and I do believe it's the Burlington GO Station, is looking at an opportunity if they partner up with a developer to redevelop some of the lands they own that would supplement or complement the existing GO Transit Station and allow for the mixed use that we're proposing around here. So they're going to be doing that through other GO stations. And so in particular, and the reason I say that is because there is that MTO lot and GO lot, and I could see eventually in the future when the market arrives, that's something that they might entertain here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, then, I'd like to follow, and I have a question for the DeSantis presenter
Surely.
as well. So the property, the GO bus is currently owned by the provincial government? Okay. And then the intensification of commercial space that the DeSantis presenter was referencing is on that property, or where is that?
Yeah, that might be something you can clarify with the presenter. We haven't been privy to the calculations and sort of how the numbers were factored in. Through you, Madam Chair.
All right, then, if I could ask from the DeSantis, there was a concern about your corporate center that could not
So
be...
Mr. Ahrens, if you can come forward. And can you just stay, Diana and Patrick, to see if there are more questions for you?
So the concern, I guess, was that the zoning would allow a corporate center kind of use on the south side of the highway, while DeSantis wants to build a corporate center on the north side.
Correct.
And then you said that the residential component couldn't be occupied or finished until the corporate center was built. So who imposes this restriction, or is that just, is that a business decision that the DeSantis Corporation is looking at?
So through the chair to Councillor Timms, that actually was a condition imposed by the town of Grimsby when they zoned that Aquazul, that horseshoe-shaped building. The west half of that building was frozen, placed in a holding category until that corporate center was built. So there's about 178 apartment units that have been sold and are ready to go, but have to be held back until that corporate center is up and framed and completed.
So it's a municipal decision the town of Grimsby has made about what the sequence is.
That's correct, and I guess our position is, and now the town of Grimsby is adding these more office uses, which makes it even more difficult to build that office building. So the whole problem is being exacerbated, in our opinion.
Okay, thank you. I think I understand the concern better now.
Right,
Madam
thank you.
Chair.
And I guess what the presenters were saying, that it's a timing issue more than anything else. Is that correct? The timing of the building of these corporate centers on the south side.
So if I can respond to that, if in fact, staff are suggesting that the redevelopment, which is threatening Mr. DeSantis's project, is 10 to 20 years away, then why not put it in a holding zone anyway? Why not provide that surety to Mr. DeSantis? He's zoned, he's site plan approved, he's serviced.
Right. Do you have
Thank
a
you.
response to that, Dan? Yeah, please.
So through you, Chair, in my past experience, we've kind of been looking throughout Ontario, and we haven't seen an example yet. But for phasing policies, we typically phase in greenfield areas, and the reason you're phasing is because of infrastructure. So you might have, 7 major landowners, and you have a pipe at point A and a landowner at point, E, and you don't want to leapfrog and have all this development without the pipe going through. So that's typically why you use phasing measurements. It's not to control the market. It's not to control free enterprise, and one employer or one landowner gets an advantage over somebody else to attract employment. I think if we were to put a phasing policy and are directed by regional council, my only concern is that the town of Grimsby has a limited employment base. They're fully almost built out. And if someone were to come tomorrow and, maybe wanted to redevelop the Rona site, and that was a particular site because they wanted to be at that location, and we put in this phasing policy because for Mr. DeSantis' site, the town of Grimsby might lose that employment opportunity. Maybe they go over 250 Road to locate on the exact same side because that's where they want to be. So we have to be cautious about that. The good news is employment does take longer to come on stream, but if you go down the corridor to Stony Creek, you're seeing a lot of office being built on the QEW frontage on both the north and south sides, and it's pretty much almost built out. So it's coming to Niagara. I do think we want to work with Mr. DeSantis, and how do we get that employment center up as quick as possible. I don't think the way to do it is through a phasing policy. So is there an opportunity for our ECDF staff to work closely in order to get this on board, or to work with the town of Grimsby? I think there's other solutions other than a phasing policy.
Thank you very much. Councillor Quirk.
Thank you. I just had a question for John.
And do you want to come to the microphone? Sorry. Sorry, I think this is about the only way I can handle this.
Yeah. And I apologize for not doing the questions earlier. I thought we were going to ask questions to
Your
staff
apology is
and John,
accepted.
so I appreciate that. My question to you, John, is on your slide that had the 342 unit building, you have like 178 of the and I'm going to get AquaBlue and AquaZul all confused, but it's the 10-story one with the extra ones. Where are you at with the marketing and sale of those, like with the pre-sales? Like, is that sold out, ready to go, or are you, like, I'm just trying to understand the issue as I understand it, and sort of what takes it sort of out of the purview of like a long-term planning decision is there is a holding provision that prevents you from moving forward with those extra units, right?
So through the chair, AquaBlue and AquaZul are both award-winning Ontario home builders and Niagara home builder projects. Both have been 100% sold. So those 178 units that have the holding provision, 178 families are waiting to move in.
So it seems to me, Madam Chair, and commentary, that this is a discussion to be had between the lower tier, the local tier, with respect to how the site plan gets developed. My concern is, as you know, 92% of our assessment in Grimsby is residential, and the local council has made every effort to try to find ways to change that ratio and get more with employment lands, commercial, industrial, and I think this is the approach that we have to take. But I do know, I recognize your concerns specifically on a financial and marketing front and a commercial one. I don't think it is appropriate for the good planning doesn't pick winners and losers in terms of the commercial aspect. Good planning talks about what makes sense in the long run, and I would be concerned about trying to dictate market conditions, because we talk about all that growth in the west end of Grimsby as that migration around the lake from Toronto and Mississauga and Oakville and coming our way into Niagara, and we're the first stop here in Grimsby. The same is true for the commercial side of it, and as Diana alluded to, we see the growth on the commercial side in Stony Creek right now, so we need to be ready for it and prepped for it. So my preference would be for a negotiated discussion between the local tier and DeSantis for dealing with that specific site issue, but recognizing that we need the commercial development opportunities, and the fact that those other redevelopment opportunities would have to go through the site plan process. They'd have to go through the whole OPA or zoning bylaw amendment process, even if this passes. So we're really not, even if it goes through, if it gets appealed, it goes through, none of these things are going to change within the time frame to do that. So I'm hopeful that council and committee will move forward with this, because GO Transit as a whole is so much more important. And if we pass this, it makes that argument for bringing it faster and here throughout Niagara by 2021, which we're asking for, that much easier when we're going through this. Thank you.
Okay, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just a brief comment, and let me assure committee that there is no proposal here to remove that employment land, that Casablanca Corporate Center. I mean, we recognize the long-term planning vision for the DeSantis complex is a mixed-use community. We've got the residential, we've got apartments, townhouses, and an office building. And in fact, we don't even have the power to apply to remove that employment land because it is designated employment. And that can only be done by the town and the region as part of your MCR process. We're powerless. We have no intention to remove that employment. We recognize the importance. It's just, it seems like the planned function is being undermined with all this additional potential office space.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, just as an addition to that, because I think, John, through you, Madam Chair, I think John's completely right. I think the town itself has put these provisions in because development has changed. We had a situation downtown where there was a commercial, supposed to be a commercial residential work live, and they came back and said, well, we can't find the commercial tenant, so let's convert it to residential, and the thrust was, well, okay, let's do that, and we lost that more commercial space. So I recognize why the town is so concerned, not about a conversion, just about getting the building built in first place. So depending, and we know that DeSantis is there for the long term. They're much respected building throughout Hamilton, Niagara, and they have definitely indicated their desire to be part of the Grimsby community by moving their head offices to that new location once the rest of it's put together. Those are all great reasons to have a more negotiated local areas discussion about that, to find a way to deal with your issue. Because in my personal opinion, I would rather get the 10-story built and get the assessment online now for the taxes that are coming than messing around with trying to get a building built first and foremost. So in my humble opinion, that the taxes represented by that 10-story building are more important to me than making sure the commercial gets built. But as long as that there's a phased approach, because the last thing I want to see is a frame skeleton that sits there for 20 years because it's not a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Kasman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I've answered my own question. I see the perimeter of the secondary plan limits. I just asked if, through you, if Diana can confirm that the DeSantis site is not within the secondary plans, outside the secondary plan.
Through your chair, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Outside.
Right, thank you. Seeing no further questions, and thank you very much for the delegation and the presenters. The reports are on the floor, 5.1, and there's an item of correspondence, 6.3. We have a mover and a seconder. So I'm ready for the question. All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried unanimously, and thank you. Moving on to our changed agenda, we're going to 4.2, It's PDS 20, Niagara Escarpment Commission, CANF, designation deferral. We do have a delegation, Mr. Neil DeRuyter from MHBC Planning. And could I have a mover and seconder for the report as well? The report is 5.5. Councillor Dart, and the seconder, please, for the report. 5.5. Councillor Timms, thank you. Please, am I saying your name correctly, DeRuyter?
Perfect.
Thank you. Oh, good. I'm so happy to be perfect about something.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name's Neil DeRuyter. I'm a planner with MHBC Planning. I'm here on behalf of CANF for 590 Glendale Avenue, a property that they have in the city of St. Catharines. I just included a couple slides. I'll kind of flip back and forth. I think what I wanted to do today was just give the committee a brief overview of where we're at with this project, and then just highlight my client's support for the recommendations that are in front of you. In 2015, CANF submitted a request to the province for an urban area designation in the Niagara Escarpment Plan. And so in the map in front of you, the lands that we're talking about are highlighted in red. It's the frontage along Glendale Avenue. It's about 17 hectares of land. Right now, the lands are located at the edge of the Niagara Escarpment Plan. You can see just at the top there, they're designated escarpment protection area. The remainder of CANF's lands are also within the Niagara Escarpment Plan area, which are comprised of the Royal Niagara Golf Club. Those lands are not subject to this urban request. We're simply looking at the lands that are currently vacant that are fronting onto Glendale Avenue. The escarpment itself is about over a kilometer away from these lands. We think that this property was originally included in the Niagara Escarpment Plan because of its ownership. It's currently owned by the Seaway Corporation. Currently, the Seaway Corporation is in discussions with CANF to sell the lands. We expect a closing date to occur in the summer. So in terms of the process where we've been at with the Ministry of Natural Resources, in 2017, they deferred the request due to one or more outstanding technical matters. And I think it's important that the committee is aware that the vast majority of urban requests within the Niagara Escarpment Plan were rejected by the province. We feel that the province sees that there is merit to this proposal. They have some further clarifications, which is what we're trying to address and what we're trying to address today. We've been told by the ministry that Cabinet has to make a decision on this property by the spring of 2019. In order for Cabinet to come to that decision, they're expecting a recommendation from ministry staff, which we've been told they have to make by fall 2018. In order for the ministry to make a recommendation, they've outlined a series of items that we have to respond to. These are summarized within the report in front of you. I would say that for the majority, they are quite resolvable, and we have actually resolved several of them. The matter that we're talking about today and hoping to get a resolution from the region on is a question about conformity with the 2017 growth plan. It's been raised by ministry staff whether this request has been supported through the region's municipal comprehensive review process. As the committee would be well aware, that process isn't close to completion. Currently, we're kind of stuck. On one hand, the ministry is saying you have to be justified through this municipal comprehensive review process, but on the same hand, we're currently designated escarpment protection, so we can't be considered through that process. And I also do want to note, it's important the committee is aware that an urban area designation in the Niagara Escarpment Plan is not an entitlement to development. We would still have to go through the municipal comprehensive review process through the region. We're not trying to bifurcate that process by doing this. This is a necessary step, but we feel that for us to simply wait and see how and just assume that because we have this request in that we'll get full consideration through the MCR process, we don't feel that's going to happen. And frankly, the timelines aren't in our favor right now with when Cabinet has to make a decision. So to move the process forward, we've been meeting on several occasions with city and regional staff. We've prepared a joint recommendation that's outlined in the staff report in front of you. And really, we think this kind of keeps the ball moving, keeps us in the game, in that we acknowledge that a settlement expansion would still be required, prior to any development on the lands, but that the request for the urban area designation that's currently in front of Cabinet is supported by the region. The city and the region have supported this request in previous occasions. The importance of having this meeting and this resolution is to provide specific correspondence and documentation with respect to the issue that's been raised by the ministry. So in our opinion, this is a local resolution for technical matter and would ensure that this request is appropriately considered through the region's municipal comprehensive process. I think most importantly, it would prevent the province from just sitting on this request and ultimately likely refusing it if we don't provide any further documentation from the region with regard to this matter. So with that, we support the recommendation that's outlined in the staff report in front of you. We feel it's imperative that the ministry is aware of these recommendations. So we would encourage the committee to move forward with it and then go to council for ratification. And just to close, I think CANF really wants to make it known that we really appreciate the diligence that's been shown by both the city, its staff, the region, and its staff in meeting with us, talking about the situation we're in. This is a really unique situation. You don't come across this very often. And I think due to a lot of hard work, openness and discussion, I think we've come up with a solution that balances all the interests involved, including the protection of the escarpment, but also recognizes where these lands are in the context of region and the future growth within the region. So with that, Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you very much, and we'll entertain questions about the presentation and the report. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So both are on the table for discussion at this point. And in the report, there's a maps on, I guess, page 106 that breaks the parcels up. Urban use and site-specific amendment UA04. I don't know if we can get that on the screen, but your slide through you, Madam Chair, to the presenter, doesn't seem to break the properties up quite the same way. The red line, yeah, so that's a closer view, that helped. There's a piece there that is that the third canal runs through, and the Seaway operates that as a raceway between the Lock 7 pond and the Flight Locks ponds. I would assume that there's two different properties there. 590 Glendale does not include the third canal. And where's that property line? It appears to be indicated on this page 106.
Through you, Madam Chair, I apologize. The map that's in front of you shows the property lines in a yellow line. Okay. You are correct that the third canal is a separate property from 590 Glendale. And I should note for the committee that the third canal and the Seaway Haulage Road and the adjacent lands, even though they are subject to the request for an urban designation, those lands will be retained by the Seaway for operational considerations. We're not, as part of CANF's proposal, there wouldn't be any development proposed on those lands, so there would be a further buffer then in terms of that third canal. So those lands, even though they are subject to the urban request, would not be subject to any future development.
Okay, so I guess begs the question. The minister of the federal government owns the property. Seaway manages it. Have they split the property yet? Or is that something to follow? And why do we need, I would rather see we just designate the 590 Glendale parcel that is going to be sold to CANF, I guess.
Through you, Madam Chair, to answer that, I'll go through the second question first. The reason why it has been included is because technically 590 Glendale is within the city of St. Catharines. And in order for this to be in the future considered as part of a future settlement boundary expansion, it needs to be connected to the existing urban boundary within St. Catharines. So right now where you see the western property, where the property in red where we've outlined the western line, that's currently adjoining to the existing urban boundary of St. Catharines at the GM plant. So that's why it has been included, is to offer the continuity. It would be a more difficult endeavor if we left that open, because then we're kind of leapfrogging the St. Catharines urban boundary. And in response to your first question, we expect that the closing will happen with Seaway in the next month or two, and that the property will be further divided based upon that understanding. So it will be a separate ownership, separate from CanF's lands.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I see from the attachments that the city of St. Catharines has approved this and supported this some time ago. So the at least some piece of Niagara on the Green will be in St. Catharines when it gets developed. Appreciate that, Lord Mayor.
Thank you.
Give us a
I don't
little
know
bit more.
if Councillor Dart
Those
approves,
are my
but
questions. Thank you.
yeah, thank you very much, Councillor James. Councillor Dart.
Thank you. Thank you for that lead-in too, by the way. I was under the assumption that that was part of Niagara on the Lake, because you can see the urban boundary for St. Catharines is just to the left of that. But that definitely is in St. Catharines?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll attempt to do the pointer as best as I can here. We've kind of got the line, the municipal boundaries drawn right here.
Right.
So it's the southern portion here of Niagara on the Green, that's the southern limit, and then it runs in a north direction, which I believe that's Horner Road. So that's where Niagara on the Lake is. So it's a little piece, I think it's, when you look on a map, it's the furthest southeastern piece of St. Catharines.
Because it looks, if you look to the left of the red square or rectangle, it says there that that's the St. Catharines urban boundary. Looks like there's a piece in the middle.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I apologize for that. I think that's really showing the urban boundaries St. Catharines. So this is the little sliver of St. Catharines that's outside of the urban boundary, so that line that you're seeing on that map delineates the urban boundary.
Okay, so the rest of the, sorry, through you, Chair, the rest of the golf club is all in Niagara on the Lake?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes. The rest, well, actually, there's a point of the golf club that's known as the Four Corners, where actually it meets Niagara on the Lake, Thorold, Niagara Falls, and St. Catharines, and that's...
It's international.
It's international, that's for sure. I think it's at the bottom corner down here. So it's kind of it's really meeting at the cross section. So in terms of the property that's in front of you, though, it's strictly within St. Catharines.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dart. Are there any other questions or comments? Yes, Councillor Augustine.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I just don't understand the rationale for doing this right now. If I look at the recommendation that's before us, which is a joint recommendation, or it's being sought to be a joint recommendation, it does require that there's this comprehensive review has to occur. So prior to the development of the subject lands, a settlement area boundary expansion would be required, which must occur through municipal comprehensive review. So I don't understand why we would, on one hand, designate it urban area in the NEP, Niagara Escarpment Plan, and then say you have to do a comprehensive review. Why not do the comprehensive review? That's not clear to me. I don't know if staff can answer that.
Who can answer this? Oh, thank you. Director Giles will answer.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, my understanding, and I believe it's is correct, is that in order to actually be considered for a future urban boundary expansion, they have to have, under the Niagara Escarpment Commission, they have to have an urban designation. If they don't have an urban designation as part of the Niagara Escarpment Plan, then you can't actually be considered for an urban boundary expansion.
So we can't study it ahead of it being in the plan, is that?
Correct. And unless this designation is changed, you can't even consider it.
Okay. I guess, you know, the report makes reference, Madam Chair, to other areas across Niagara that, especially in the NEC lands, I think there were 12 that this one was deferred. But I can think of other areas. I look to Mayor Campion and the city of Welland, and they're interested in an urban area expansion. I'm warming to it, Mr. Mayor. So, but I just, you're working me well. But just, you know, why would we do it in this case, and yet we're forcing others to go through a whole process?
Yes. Director?
you, Madam Chair. Basically, any urban boundary expansion is required to go through a process that the province has set out under the growth plan. You can't basically avoid that. All that we're saying here is that in order for that process, in order for the owners of this property, future owners of this property, to go forward under that process, they have to have this designation under the Niagara Escarpment Plan. For all potential urban boundary expansions, you can go through the entire process that the province has laid out, and that still doesn't guarantee that the province is going to approve that urban boundary expansion. So every potential urban boundary expansion does have to go through the same process, irrespective of where it is within the growth plan area.
Okay. I'm not as familiar with the NEC plan or the Niagara Escarpment plan as Councillor Beatty would be as our representative. So what does this designation get you as urban area, designate the subject lands as urban area, other than with this, like it's sort of with this specific designation on it? Can we just hear about that?
Yes.
Through you, Chair. Thanks for the question. I think what probably we should also mention here is a Niagara Escarpment Plan amendment can be done under certain designations in the plan to change uses and allow permitted uses. However, the change from one designation to an escarpment urban area, so that designation change, in this case it's from escarpment protection area to escarpment urban area. The urban area change component can only be done at the time of a 10-year review. So that request was made by CNEF during the 2015 to 2017 coordinated policy review, along with other site-specific requests in Niagara. This has been deferred, and so that's sort of the catch-22 of this situation, is that in order for this to move forward and be considered under the MCR, that urban designation needs to be in place. If the land was identified through the MCR as maybe, and it doesn't have the designation changed, CNEF would be looking at waiting until the next 10-year review before they could make that application, before that designation change could occur. So there's sort of a timing issue that's with that. What this use is adding is the ability for urban or residential uses, commercial uses, typically uses you'd associate with an urban area, to occur on this property if an urban area boundary was adjusted to include it. So that's basically what the situation is. There's a timing issue, and then there's uses that are permitted that are looking to be added to the property.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the answer. Madam Chair, the final thing I'll say is, this is my opinion, but I think the recommendation is it could be clarified. Let me put it that way. So recommendation number 1, that the joint recommendation contained in the body of the report be endorsed. Why don't we just put the recommendation in what council's voting on, so that when somebody looks back at the minutes, they don't have to say, oh, okay, now I got to get this report and whatever. They know what we're endorsing. I'd prefer that, Madam Chair, that we vote on it that way. And it's not that long, but that it's very specific, and it would be recommendation number 1.
Can we put that change on the screen? Do you want to make that?
It's the recommendation, I guess, on page 3. It just would be clearer, because then you only look back in the minutes and.
Yeah, we just want to get it on the screen so that everybody knows where we are. Are those all of your comments?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, while they're working on that,
Okay.
Is it possible to show on the map exactly where the city limits, the city boundaries between
The
Niagara and the lake?
municipal boundary?
Municipal boundary as opposed to the urban boundary? Two different things here, and that's, I think the red line covers up the city
municipal boundary?
perhaps, but if someone could put that on the map, or,
All right, well, we'll work on two things then. Got it. We're just working on the first request here. Just requesting your patience for a moment. Sorry, Mr. Director. Does anyone have more questions for Mr. DeRyers so he can? No, so you can sit down then, and in case we need to, I'll call you forward. Thank you for your presentation. Okay, we're ready. Ta-da. You turn the timer off, please. I don't want to time it. Okay, there we go. Councillor Augustine, is that what you were suggesting? It's just.
Yeah, I believe if it's the same wording as the report, I think it's cleaner. So
Okay.
thank you, I appreciate that, staff facilitating that.
That's fine. Okay. Any other, Councillor Timms, did you have something else? Yes. Oh, the map. He wanted the.
Well, if you pull the map up, I can give a verbal.
Yeah, if you pull the map up, we can give a verbal. We're all okay with the revised recommendation?
Just the map for this presentation.
Yeah, the map from the presentation.
I can tell them where the boundary is.
That's the one. Can you want to zoom in on that?
No, that's fine right there.
Right there, okay.
So
Councillor Timms?
The municipal boundary here goes along Glendale Avenue, and it goes right up to the edge of the existing residential development, and at the edge of the residential development, it heads directly south, and it basically runs along the back of General Motors.
okay, so if you were to extend Homer Road through the golf course. Is
Correct,
that the,
yeah, that's right. Yep.
that is the boundary. So
Yep.
some of the golf course is in St. Catharines. The third canal is in St. Catharines.
That's what this,
Extend Homer Road down to the bottom of where the red line is. And cut west.
No, that's where I'm not
We have
clear.
so many experts, nobody needs to say a thing. All right, let's have the real expert. Go to the screen and show us here.
basically, the boundary comes right down here.
Yep.
To this line.
Yeah.
And cuts across it.
All right.
All right, we got that?
Some of the golf course, all of the
See,
third canal.
we learn something new every day.
And it's the extension of the Homer Road allowance.
The extension of the Homer Road allowance.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so do we have any more questions or comments? I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. Now I'm going to try to remember where we are. but I do know. We're going to 3.2, which is on, thank you, Mr. Darius, on the front page, the first page of the agenda, the overview. The overview of PDS 17-2018 and PDS 18, agriculture and natural environment project frameworks. I'm going to call Sean Norman, he's already there, and Lindsay Savage, welcome. Yes, but I'm going to ask for 5.2 and 5.3, those reports to be put on the floor, please. Councillor Quirk, Councillor Dart. And before you begin, Mr. Norman, the director has a comment.
Thank you. Through the chair, just to put these reports into perspective, over the last couple of committee meetings, we've been presenting project frameworks for the various background studies of the official plan. A while back, Dave Hayworth, who is actually the project coordinator for the official plan, did a presentation that outlined 8 background studies for the official plan. What we're presenting today are 2 more of those frameworks that basically outline the background studies, what they're going to do, what they're not going to do, timelines, and basically consultation process. So this is just 2 more of those background reports out of the 8 that we're presenting today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sean?
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. PDS 17 and PDS 18, 2018 before you are seeking endorsement of the Agriculture and Natural Environment Project Frameworks for the new official plan. On January 31st, a joint presentation was made to committee to provide an overview of the project frameworks and seek direction to consult on more detailed work programs. PDS 6 and PDS 7, 2018 were endorsed by committee and subsequently by council. Since that time, we have presented twice to the Area Planners Group and held individual meetings with planning staff at the local municipalities and NPCA. The meetings provided valuable input to help shape the final work programs that are contained in the reports before you today. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a summary of the input that we received, outline the changes that have been made, and provide an overview of the work programs. A more complete outline is included in the text of each report. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry.
I will start off with the agriculture work program contained in PDS 17. As you know, agriculture is an important component of the regional economy in Niagara. The region's current agricultural policies were the first of their kind in Ontario, encouraging a wide range of farm diversification uses that contribute to long-term farm viability. The work program will build on this strong framework and support the region's continued leadership in agricultural policy development. At the one-on-one meetings, we gained valuable, At the one-on-one meetings, we gained valuable insight into issues of importance in the local municipalities. We heard concerns about certain lands that are designated for agriculture, but may have limitations due to parcel size, soil health, water issues, etc. There were discussions about the need to examine these lands and explore opportunities to improve their viability. The province's agricultural system mapping for the Greater Golden Horseshoe should be reviewed with consideration for any refinements that may be beneficial in Niagara region. Concerns were raised regarding how wineries are addressed in the Niagara Escarpment Plan and the province's guidelines on permitted uses in Ontario's prime agricultural areas. We heard about the importance of agriculture impact assessment. Staff are in the process of reviewing the draft guidelines released by the province and will be reporting to this committee with proposed comments. In addition, concerns were raised regarding cannabis and its interaction with the agricultural system. The input received through the one-on-one meetings helped to confirm that the agriculture work program is appropriately scoped to address issues of both regional and local importance. The issues raised will be considered in the background study and the overall implementation of the work program. The agricultural work program will be supported by extensive consultation and engagement activities. I will just highlight a couple of points from this slide. We are proposing to establish an agriculture working group comprised of planning staff from the region and local municipalities and representation from interested provincial ministries. The working group will help ensure that the agriculture work program reflects a range of perspectives and areas of expertise. In addition, the Agricultural Policy and Action Committee will be engaged throughout the duration of the work program. Additional details on engagement are included in the staff report. The project overview that is shown here is very similar to the approach that was outlined on January 31st. The work program includes undertaking a comprehensive background study, developing and evaluating options, and recommending a preferred option for an agricultural system comprised of both mapping and policies. We will also consider various tools to support implementation. There are several major points of engagement that will be used to inform the technical aspects of the work program. At each point of engagement, we will consult with our partners, stakeholders, and the public, as well as committee and council. An Indigenous engagement strategy is also being developed for the official plan at large.
Thank you, Lindsay. I'm now going to provide you with details of the Natural Environment Project Framework contained in PDS 18-2018. You will note that many elements of the work program and engagement program are the same. This has been done purposely, as we have shared best practices across disciplines and tried to develop an approach that will allow us to best integrate the work programs for agriculture and the natural environment. At the one-on-one meetings, the mapping of natural environment features and systems was identified as a key issue in almost all discussions. There were a range of concerns noted, most related to its accuracy and reliability. The need to have dependable mapping to support local planning was stressed, as well as a consideration of mapping options. Similarly, watershed planning was identified as an important issue in many discussions. Originally, we had proposed to consider watershed planning separately. However, as we held our discussions and the level of interconnectedness became clear, the proposal for separate work programs was reevaluated. Thirdly, woodlands were brought up as an important issue by many. Specific input ranged, but included, for example, the process to determine significance and die-off from emerald ash borer. When discussing consultation engagement, public and stakeholder education was identified as a highly important consideration. We were told that there is a need for a strong focus on education early in the process and to ensure that misconceptions regarding natural environment planning do not prevail. In response to the level of concern related to mapping, we will address this as a high priority and first component of the work program. We had originally proposed to consider mapping as part of the overall background study. We instead proposed to prepare a standalone discussion paper in advance of the background report. This will allow us to consider the issue in more detail and take early action if required. Watershed planning will be added to the scope of work. Similar to mapping, watershed planning will be considered a high priority topic through an early discussion paper. As mentioned during my presentation on watershed planning at committee on April 4th, the new regional official plan will need to be informed by watershed planning. We need to understand the information that we have available and what additional work will be required. Policies and process for watershed planning will be developed in consideration of local conditions in Niagara. Finally, in response to the level of discussion we heard during the one-on-one meetings, we will ensure that each point of the work program considers woodlands, from the background study to the policy development process. The range of specific input that we heard will be considered. Through the one-on-one discussions, it was confirmed that a technical group of planners should be utilized to support the natural environment work. A technical advisory group will be formed to work with region staff and our consulting team. The group will be comprised of planning staff from the region, local municipalities, NPCA, and interested provincial ministries. Similar to the agricultural work program, our approach to engaging the range of stakeholders will be to use focused presentations and smaller meetings. Experience in the past has been that this type of engagement allows for an environment which supports the open exchange of information. Public open houses will also be held during the major points of engagement as outlined on the next slide. A presentation to each of the local councils once the background study is complete is also proposed for this work program. This presentation may be standalone, in conjunction with agriculture, or as part of an overall update on the regional official plan. The project overview that is shown here is very similar to the approach that was outlined on January 31st and as previously outlined for the agricultural work program. What we are now showing is the major points of engagement that will be used to inform the technical aspects of the project. During each of these phases, there will be consultation with the full range of project stakeholders, as well as committee and council. The complete schedule for reporting to committee and council is included in the staff report. In addition, the discussion papers for mapping and watershed planning, which are in addition to the work program, are now being shown. As previously presented and outlined further through the slides today, natural environment planning and agricultural systems planning are highly integrated. The required work to support the new regional official plan in each of these areas will be completed concurrently and will have regard for each other. For both agriculture and natural environment, the goal is to develop new systems and policies for the regional official plan. The principle for decision-making in both work programs will be to use a transparent, defendable, and evidence-based approach. Criteria for evaluation will be developed in consideration of local priorities. Finally, both of the work programs have been designed with several points of decision-making and consultation along the way. This will give committee and council the opportunity to participate and provide direction throughout. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there are questions from Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, a great presentation. Love the work we're doing. My question was, at one point in this term, we talked about undertaking a program to start doing some ground truthing on the mapping process. Where is more for update? Where are we at with that process, or is that going to be captured in what the work that's being done here?
Through the chair, yes, that is a priority. That's why we've brought that work up to the front now. So one of the things that we have to do that's been identified is actually start putting a paper together to look at how that's going to be done. We've had a lot of discussion with the municipalities, and we know that that's a big issue. It's hard to, well, we've discussed a lot of options, and we haven't come up with one yet because it's a very big area and a lot of territory to cover. So it's not it's not easy to do, but that's going to be our priority. And the first step is going to prepare basically a paper that says, here's the options and approaches we think are the best way to go, and then have the discussion on that.
All right, thank you.
And Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have questions specific to the report. So through your indulgence, if it would be appropriate to put that report on the floor. And
I thought I had put it on the floor.
While the presenters are here?
Yeah, it is on the floor.
It is on the floor?
Yes.
Okay, so I can ask questions to the report as well?
Of course.
And our presenter, thank you. So specifically, first off, I'm glad when I look at that last bullet point about education on a range of natural environment topics was identified as a priority. And those are the same conversations I've had probably over the last year where education is important. And I'm glad there's municipal planning staff that agree with me, because I believe it was Councillor Augustine who made the comment that he didn't want to be educated. He wanted something very black and white. So I'm glad education.
I don't know what the councillor is referring to in a point of privilege. Maybe he can just make his commentary without saying something about other councillors.
Okay.
Well, no, I'm just making the point that I'm glad that there's concurrence with respect to the need for education, because when we're going through this process, sometimes when we do the natural environment planning and mapping, it's confusing. And when you're dealing with MNRF, possibly Minister of the Environment, NPCA, NEC, regional and local municipal planning staff, there's confusion there. So I'm glad to see that the education portion plays a pivotal role in moving forward. I do have specific questions to the report. So when you talk about flexibility within the policy, how much flexibility will there be or can there be when we're talking about crafting public policy and official plan amendments and the OPA moving forward? Is there the opportunity to stay nimble? Is there the opportunity to refine some of those elements? I guess what I'm saying is it written in stone right off the bat, or as these conditions change, is there opportunities to revisit it or make the appropriate changes at that time?
Through you,
Yes.
Madam Chair. I guess there's probably two parts of the answer to that. Is one, you're talking about certain things being written in stone. So I think with the natural environment planning, there's kind of two parts that we'll be kind of looking at and balancing through our work. Is one is there's a number of things that were kind of specifically given from the province through the PPS. There's a number of features and things that we have to look at. There's, as many are aware, there's a new growth plan natural heritage system. So in that regard, there are those things that have been given to us by the province that were specifically going to be implemented. So there can be a minor amount of flexibility or ability to refinement. There's other areas of the natural environment planning that aren't specifically, that are a little bit more open-ended in terms of the provincial requirements that allow us to look at them in a little bit more detail and have policies that kind of will reflect more in the local conditions. So I guess, yeah, there'd be two parts. There's some parts that are pretty firm and pretty given us from the province. So we're looking at how to take those and then looking at the other parts of it, which are some of the features and policies that aren't specifically prescribed by the province, and looking at those and how they work together, kind of, as you said, based on kind of local conditions and what makes sense for the kind of natural environment that we have here.
And that's a great segue, and thank you for that. And that's a great segue to my next question. So when you did these one-on-ones with these individual planning staff members, did you find that the concerns were universal, or were they very municipal-centric with respect to an issue that one municipality was having as opposed to another municipality, or were they pretty much universal when you did these one-on-one?
Through you, Madam Chair. I think the one, and it's already kind of been brought up, the one universal that we heard about was about the mapping. That's basically what everyone told us about, was the mapping is very important. The mapping is a little bit old, and there's a lot of kind of new stuff coming in. So that's the one that we universally heard. Watershed planning, I say, was pretty much second on the list. We heard concerns about that, and woodlands would be the third thing that was kind of we universally heard about. And then kind of on the other side, there was kind of on the flip side of it, there was some that were locally specific. For example, many of the municipalities that were on the Lake Ontario shoreline, for example, they talked to us a lot about shoreline protection and how the shoreline fits into their kind of local natural environment system. So that's something that they would have identified that municipalities that don't have shoreline would have identified. Some stuff that we heard, for example, from Grimsby, would be a little bit different in terms of how the escarpment works into their community. That wouldn't have been the same that we heard from some of the southern municipalities that have much more kind of talked to us about the interaction between agriculture and natural environment, and that's important to them. So what we really tried to do was document the concerns that we heard, and kind of, as I said, listed the ones that were common, and then some of the ones that were more standalone. We listed as well, woodlots offsetting, those types of things. We listed some of the more kind of standalone issues as well, but some of those issues that we heard only from one or two municipalities, we still took that feedback and we still want to incorporate that into the study. So the study is going to look at issues that we heard from everyone as well as issues that we just heard from a few.
So one of the concerns that I've always had when there's an overlay on private property, whatever the piece of property is, one of the concerns I've always had, and that's been brought to my attention, and the comment has always been, you got to come out here. You got to come out here and have a look at what the mapping says on this property, and it's not even close to that. And I guess that goes back to your question about the mapping being a little outdated. So moving forward then, we're going to be putting boots on the ground. We're going to be doing the appropriate ground truthing that correspond and back up the aerial data that we will be utilizing for this exercise. I hope so.
Yes.
Yes.
Through you, Madam Chair. There's two kind of parts of that. One is, and we heard through the discussions, and first part of that is having mapping that's better and it's more reliable. The second part of that is having more flexibility in our policy. So for example, if our mapping has the area wrong, in the past in some circumstances, it might require a regional official plan or some mapping amendment to change the mapping. But what we've been kind of looking at are opportunities that allow landowners or developers or something to better refine the mapping on their properties without having to go through a full process. So I guess in response to your comment, we're looking at it in two ways. One is how we can make the mapping better, and the second part is how we can make the policies that support that mapping a little bit more flexible. So those are kind of the two ways that we would look at it through our work program.
Okay, one last question for you, Madam Chair. So the lens we're looking through right now then, we're talking about a clean slate and doing the natural heritage mapping and natural environment planning through a clean slate lens. And I'm going to give some context to that. When we look at some of the historical data and some of the historical uses of properties and seeing their evolution over time, whether they started as agricultural pieces, whether they started as some other usage, and now they've morphed or turned into something on our OPA or our official plan designations now. Will we be looking at any of those historical uses of those particular pieces of property, or is this a clean lens, a clean slate?
Through you, Madam Chair. I think, yeah, stand to the first part. That's really kind of the approach we're taking, is kind of a clean slate approach. What we heard through kind of our early consultation is that the system that the region has is getting a little bit outdated now. It's a few years old, and as well, there's so much kind of change coming at us from the province in terms of what we need to do. So it was going to be, too difficult to try and kind of bend and mold what we had to fit all the new requirements. So we really wanted to take a fresh look at it from a mapping and policy perspective. And my apologies, the second part of your question was historical uses. Sorry.
Historical uses, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's something that we look at, like, as part of the kind of the background study. Like what we're trying to hopefully get across through this is that there's a lot to the natural environment planning. There's a lot of changes that come recently. So really what we want to do is kind of set ourselves up by doing this background study to kind of understand what are all the issues, historical issues, new changes from the province, everything that's coming, and setting ourselves up with that foundation through the background study so that when we go to the next steps and kind of do the policy development and to do the mapping, that we've been fully informed by a background study, which is going to kind of catch all the issues.
Okay, well, I hope they're going to catch all the issues. That's my one concern. And, I raised this question, Madam Chair, last month, I believe, when it comes to best practice. And I'll use tree canopy, for example. And I've raised this issue over and over, and I raise it on behalf of our agricultural and farming community. When we talk about tree canopy, everyone loves trees, and everyone loves the tree canopy, and everyone wants to broaden and expand the tree canopy. But with respect to our agriculturalists and our farmers, that may not be best farming practice, having a hedgerow or lines of trees so close to a crop, because it does affect their yield. So within the overall policy, I'm wondering how we're going to capture that, because my concern has always been, if you look at what's going on in this area of the region, and someone brings it to the attention that says, well, we got the exact same issue over here, and this is the policy here, but we can't apply it to this part of the region because it impacts us in a different way. How do we capture those differences within those sub-communities, within those constituencies, whether it's the agricultural community, whether it's the conservation and environmental community? I mean, how do we balance those voices within a policy that's supposed to be a panacea for all of Niagara?
Yes, Director.
No, I can, yeah, through Madam Chair. I think, yeah, the first part of kind of your comment, I think kind of underscores the importance of the kind of relationship between agriculture and natural environment. So I think that's something we've kind of stressed from the beginning, and we've kind of tried to reiterate a bunch of times, and why we're working so closely is that we know that to kind of have a successful natural environment system and have a successful agricultural system, that we need to be speaking to each other from the very beginning. So by kind of working closely together, we're able to start picking up on those things. And I know the specific example you're talking about, the tree cover next to agricultural properties and something like that. That's something we've heard and is kind of documented through that. So that's something we'll be kind of looking at as well. And in terms of the second part, I think I think that is one of the things that we have to be concerned about, is that Niagara is so diverse in kind of our natural environment system, from what we have kind of in the Greenbelt area to kind of the growth plan area, So that's certainly a consideration that we need to take moving forward, making sure that that the policies are going to be reflective of kind of the local communities. And I think part of the way that we want to, kind of counter that is, having the technical advisory group. I think it's going to be important to us. We're really hoping to get a good kind of diversity of the municipalities participating, to having some of the kind of those important provincial ministries participating, and as well as hopefully getting representation from the MPCA participating as well, because I think we all have different perspectives on natural environment planning and what it means for us and our organizations. And by getting kind of everyone together and getting them together from, the beginning to the end of the process, hopefully we're going to be able to kind of capture those things and develop the policies that are, that something that a system that can work for the whole region in terms of having the flexibility to have it work for the whole region.
Okay, and just one last further point. You mentioned about MNRF and some of our provincial or even our federal partners possibly engaging in the process, possibly being involved in these sessions. Wouldn't you agree that it's imperative that they take part and understand the diversity and certainly the uniqueness of Niagara? Because if they're the ones that are implementing and assessing their policies, and it's their policies that impact Niagara, then I think they better understand the uniqueness of Niagara. So I'm going to encourage MNRF, provincial and federal partners, to make sure that they're engaged in this process and they understand the intentions of each one of our lower tier municipalities with respect to growth and community building. So I'm hoping I pass that on, Madam Chair.
Through Madam Chair, I'm sorry that we already have kind of had some initial discussions with them, and sorry if I misspoke and said possibly. They definitely have already, the provincial ministries certainly have already, kind of given us a strong saying that yes, they are going to participate.
Okay.
MNRF and Ministry of Municipal Affairs have both already said yes, they're eager to participate and be part of our group from that.
That's good news. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Augustine?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Question to presenters. The presentation talks about the concerns about the use of greenhouses for cannabis, but there's nothing in the report. Can we just hear a little bit more about what were those concerns and how you're kind of going to deal with that on a go-forward basis? A slide, I don't know what these slides are numbered.
Eric's, I think.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. We did hear from various municipalities the comments related to cannabis, whether that's for upcoming recreational use or existing medical uses. And in some cases, it was concerns over the amount of applications that local planning departments have received. And in other cases, it was more just sort of questioning about how to move forward with that. And so for the most part, many of the local municipalities have addressed this through local zoning bylaw amendments or through zoning that's been put in place or site plan requirements. We did say, we're not sure where we can go with this from a regional perspective, but we will include it in our study. So when we're looking at areas where we can perhaps apply policy or understand additional federal regulations and how they can be incorporated into the plan, we'll certainly look at that. But at this point, we don't really have any sort of firm direction to say, yes, we're going to make regional policies that limit this, or we aren't. We're still trying to figure out where that's going to fit in, and we'll see when the study comes out.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. The final thing, Madam Chair, I guess both reports are on the floor, but I think for the agricultural one, it would be helpful to send it to a few others. I know we're sending it to the Federations of Agriculture, but I was thinking of the Grape Growers, the Wine Council of Ontario, and the Preservation of Agricultural Land Society. If those could be included in the circulation, I think it'd be worthwhile to certainly have their input, especially since the report speaks about wineries as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yeah, just quickly to Councillor Augustine's point too, APAC has representatives from, I think, just about everyone that you mentioned there. So we will, at least indirectly through that subcommittee, make sure that we're going to get the opinions, and none of them are shy around that table. So we have the ability to make sure that their feelings about some of the policy directions we're going in are looked at very carefully. I just wanted to add on to Councillor Annunciata brings up the point, and I think the way I like to look at it is there is a natural tension between agriculture and the natural system planning, and it will always be a constant concern to the agricultural community that, for whatever reason, and after years and years of consultations, there is no clear understanding that agriculture needs to be viewed as a priority over basically every other land use. I mean, it is the stuff that feeds the cities. That's their product. It's probably and arguably the most important when you put in food and beverage manufacturing. It's arguably the most important industry in all of Niagara. And what I'm hoping is that we can, as a region, and knowing now that the municipal board has been changed into and been given new kind of direction, it points very clearly that the official plan is going to be more important than ever to get it right. And what I'm hoping, and I think you'll be hearing from, again, APAC and other organizations around the agri-food industry, is that Niagara clearly identifies that agriculture and agricultural lands are a top priority or the top priority. The new notion of agricultural impact assessment, we need to be sure that we take into account natural areas. And that's where, like Sandy was pointing out, it's in the tree fruit. If we're going to call it specialty agriculture, all in the North Niagara, and in perpetuity zone that land or freeze that land for agricultural use, we have to have regard for the impact that a neighbor can have upon the types of crops that we grow. And there's just going to be tension and disagreement between those who want to sort of renaturalize areas of our town and of our region, and those who want to preserve a long-term agricultural industry. And it's just simply going to require, I think, the official plan must clearly say that when push comes to shove, and we have an overlay, and I know that's the Ministry of Natural Resources, they're not going to give up on that one. But what we're going to need to do is to make sure we have a very strong agriculture impact assessment in place, not one that ignores the fact that, you know, somebody who decides that they're going to renaturalize the creek that is used in Niagara and the Lake for irrigation. We have to have a policy in place that says, actually, we're not going to go there because we need the infrastructure to support agriculture. So I'm really hoping that through this process, and we recognize that this plan will be more powerful than probably any official plan in the province. And so let's not be shy about if we're going to support our agri-food industry, let's not be shy about putting in place clear policies and clear statements of priority, so that when someone appeals the fact that they want to plant a bunch of purple loosestrife in the drainage ditch, or in the irrigation ditch, we have a good defense and a good rational explanation, so that we can make sure that that doesn't happen. So, anyway, I just wanted to emphasize that because I think there's real opportunity here to do some really good supportive things for the agri-food industry. And you know, if we're getting out to ahead of other regions, perhaps then let's make sure that this is a model that we're proud of and that we can hold up to be copied across other areas in the Golden Horseshoe at least.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Truer words are never spoken. Agriculture is our traditional industry and our largest, one of our largest. Thank you. Do you have additional words?
Just to follow up on Councilor Hodgson's comments, and I'll bring questions, comments up. And again, when we go about the watershed planning, when we talk about water quality, and when we talk about, you know, some of the things that we do to impact those things in Niagara, it is entirely different, and I cannot emphasize that enough, Madam Chair. It is entirely different within the ag community. And I know, speaking to agriculturists and farmers, they take offense. They take offense when we get a water quality report card and their properties are identified as being, you know, substandard. They utilize best farming practices. To Councillor Hodgson's point, it's a very unique environment that agriculturists live within, and it has to be reflected in this process that we're going through right now. There's a reason Niagara on the Lake has the lowest tree canopy, because the majority of it is agricultural land that just does not support some of the trees so close to those high cash crops. So again, it has to be reflective, and it has to spell out specifically that concern. So that's all, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for all of the comments, the questions. Ready for the question? All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. We're moving on to 6.1, 6.2, two consent items for information. And thank you for the presentation. A mover and a seconder, Councillor Beatty, Councillor Quirk. Any questions or comments? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just comments to ED3. I do appreciate in effect, the layout of the work plan that is coming forward for economic development in committee. I'm pleased to see that the tourism issue is covered under 6.B through the work of the Economic Development Officer, who's proceeding with the Niagara Gateway Information Center and the 5 Scenic Drives initiative. So pleased to see that carrying on. And the other point was that in talking about redeveloping the websites, www.welcomeniagara, just wanted to ask staff to note the need to include something about the Niagara Gateway Information Center. We have videos, we have people stopping there all the time asking about where and what to do in Niagara. And I think it's important that that be included on that website in some way.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
And otherwise, pleased to support the report.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Moving on now, this is 5.1 PDS 19, recommended membership for the Planning Advisory Committee. A mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Quirk, Councillor Marshall. Any questions or comments? Councillor Nunziata?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just how closely will the Planning Advisory Committee be working with the Economic Development Committee that we've just populated as well?
Well, I guess we've always had. Go ahead.
Well, I'm hoping there's some fidelity there, because they too, I mean, just like this committee works hand in hand with economic development, I'm hoping that there's some liaisoning and some collaborative approach between those two advisory committees as well.
Yes, and there will be. Okay. Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Now, there is a confidential report connected with this. Is there anybody who needs to go in camera to discuss this? Seeing none, what's the motion that we need? Do we need a motion? No, we don't need anything. Good. It's coming up. Other business, Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had asked the question the other day, and I wanted to be sure that I understood the waterfront enhancement strategy.
Yes.
I'm a little bit concerned about the changes I think we made this year or maybe last year, that under this waterfront enhancement strategy now, only projects $1 million or more are eligible. So any project for waterfront enhancement less than $1 million doesn't qualify. That's the one thing I'm concerned about because it eliminates a whole lot of projects. The second item is that we returned $700,000 from 2017, but as I understand it, we didn't return it to the Waterfront Enhancement Reserve Fund because we changed this now that the waterfront enhancement is not a reserve fund. We allocate $1 million a year, but if we don't use it, it's lost. It's not available, it's not accumulated. So it makes it difficult to buy a $2 million property on Lake Erie if you're never accumulating the fund. And I always understood that was the intention. $1 million a year for 10 years. If you never spent a dime, you'd have $10 million. So those are a couple of things that have changed, I think, and I just want to be clear how that works. And the other thing was that any kind of project like this has to have a commercial component or some kind of economic return. So if we wanted to acquire a beach for a public purpose, like the Wainfleet Beach the region acquired a long time ago, that kind of project or acquisition is no longer eligible for this fund. So those are three things that I don't like about the way this works. If I'm accurate, then I'd like to introduce a revisit on some of those terms.
Marion? All right, go ahead, Director Will.
Through you, Madam Chair. I'll provide some initial comments on that and then hand it over to Marion for some supplemental comments. About 2 years ago, the waterfront, it was changed to the Waterfront Investment Program. It was changed, in my understanding, I don't have the complete history, but it is now a program that is primarily directed at enhancing access to waterfront and basically is there to provide funding to developments that we've identified along waterfronts that will enhance the public access to them. There is a component where a project can include the purchase of property, but it's not just for the purchase of property. It's again for enhancement of the property and access. The commercial component to it, as you recall last year, we do include that component. We look at that in a number of ways. As you can recall last year, I believe one of the projects that got funding was for some works that were done along the Welland Canal Park in behind St. Catharines. And although that didn't have a direct commercial component to it, the logic that was used was those improvements were going to help the property values in that area as a result of the long-term improvements of that park. So yes, there are commercial components, but they're viewed, depending on the applicants that are received. For comments about the value, I think I'll just defer to Marion for that.
Marion?
Thank you for the questions through you, Madam Chair. I would echo what our director has said. There was a change to a minimum $1 million for the entire project, and there is a component that requests some construction be part of it, but that in no way prohibits acquisition of property. It just is trying to generate, my understanding of the thinking behind that new criterion was that it would then generate more access to better investment in and more sustainability of the investment in any waterfront projects happening. In terms of the commercial component, again, Doug is exactly right. The lack of a commercial component does not prohibit any application from being put in. There have been, in fact, several strong applications in the 3 cycles that we've had so far for waterfront. It was changed over in June 2016. That didn't have a specifically commercial component, but we do look more broadly at the ways that investment can be returned directly, indirectly, through induced economic benefits for the entire projects. So that is that is a concern, but it is sort of broadly defined in that sense. In terms of the funding, it is correct. It is not, the funding in this or any incentive programs really do not accrue. We have spoken and gotten some clarification with finance about that. Waterfront was funded at $1 million a year for 10 years originally. This year its funding envelope is $900,000. We cannot use those. Whatever is not used does get returned to reserve. We have pointed out that, of course, grants and incentives are not always progressive. They don't always advance in a linear way. But right now, our understanding is that through finance, that there is not a way for us to change the way that the budgeting happens for those programs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I understand the change was made sometime in 2016.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. The Lakefront Enhancement Strategy, which had a series of grants associated with it, moved to the Waterfront Investment Program in June, July of 2016. And since then, we've had 3 cycles under the Waterfront Investment Program.
Okay, thank you. And what I understand about the criteria is there's a scoring chart. And if you don't have a commercial component, you get 0 points for that piece. So it doesn't technically eliminate the project, but it makes it, you get 0 points in the overall scoring of this consideration.
Through you, Madam Chair. The criteria were reviewed in January 2017 by committee and council, and it was changed to reflect that there is public and private investment. Commercial investment isn't specifically articulated, so there is a look at both. And in the case most recently of last year's successful project, the Welland Canal Fallen Workers Memorial, there was substantial investment from a whole range of investors over time and across sectors. So that is considered. It doesn't have to just be commercial. It is true that they do look at ways in which the return on investment can be clocked, but they try very hard not to limit it to one specific kind of investment.
Okay, so donators as opposed to investors, but okay, appreciate that. So that left $700,000 and we passed the resolution to return that $700,000 to some fund. Where did that $700,000 allocation for 2017 get returned to? It's not available this year for 2018. We don't have $1,700,000 for this year. We just have $1 million.
Do we have any money?
And if we don't have a project, we don't spend it. So where did the 700
Is there somebody
go?
here from finance?
Thank
Heather?
you.
Oh, sorry, Heather. Thanks. Hi, Heather.
Reserve, any request to move funds from one year to another violate the policy or principles within the policy unless they're already encumbered. So if the following year there is a request for additional funds, then it's requested within that year.
So it to a reserve, we got a dozen of them. Which reserve do you remember?
I don't know. I know that it's in violation of the surplus deficit policy, and it goes into the general reserve, which is then allocated to all the following year based on demand or requests.
So that was one of the fundamental changes back there somewhere. It went from a reserve fund to a program. And once it becomes a program, then it's subject to this reserve, turn the money back to reserves. So, yeah, perhaps I can have a memo on the changes from the original intent. Because as I've said before, my concern is the original intent was to acquire waterfront access for the public. And this program currently almost eliminates any possibility of the region simply buying a waterfront property from a willing seller. The point scores and all those things makes it almost impossible. And that's my concern, and that's why I intend to ask to have another look at this program.
So you want a reconsideration because this has already been decided.
Well, that's where I'm headed, but that's what I want to look at this point is the evolution, the current terms, and is there any element of those current terms that we can modify which is less drastic than a full reconsideration.
Well, then why don't we ask for a report from staff to fully describe what is happening at this point? Would you like to make that motion, Councillor?
I would make that motion.
Do we
Thank
have a
you.
seconder? Councillor Marshall? All in favor? Thank you, and thank you for bringing that forward, and we'll get the whole goods on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. No, is there anything else under other business? Hoping not, seeing none. The next meeting will be held on Wednesday, May 16, 2018 at 1 p.m. in this chamber, and thank you all for your contribution.